I've studied happiness for many years and interviewed thousands of people about what helps them thrive. And one pattern keeps emerging, clearly, consistently, across every demographic, every background, every life circumstance I've encountered. The happiest people I speak to are also the most emotionally secure. Not the most successful, not the most talented, not the wealthiest or the most admired, the most emotionally secure. Research confirms what my interviews have shown. People with high emotional security have greater resilience, greater emotional well-being, and greater relationship satisfaction over the course of their lives, all of which are foundational pillars of overall happiness. But here's what I find most fascinating about emotional security. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up as bravado or confidence or the kind of loud self-assurance that fills a room. It shows up quietly. It shows up in how you navigate uncertainty, in how you respond when things don't go your way, in how you handle difficult people, difficult situations, and difficult truths about yourself. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca. These were people who built their entire philosophical lives around the cultivation of inner stability. Not the elimination of hardship, but the development of a self so grounded, so rooted, so genuinely secure, that hardship could no longer destabilize it. They called it the inner citadel, a fortress that no external circumstance could breach. That is emotional security in its purest form. And today, I want to walk you through 7 quietly powerful traits that the most emotionally secure people share. Traits I've observed in thousands of interviews, traits backed by research, and traits that find their deepest roots in the ancient Stoic tradition that has guided human beings through uncertainty for over 2,000 years. Trait number 1. They are okay with being misunderstood. This one is more radical than it sounds. We live in a culture of constant explanation, of personal branding and narrative management, and the compulsive need to make sure everyone around us has an accurate picture of who we are and why we do what we do. We over-explain in emails. We rehearse justifications in the shower. We lie awake at night mentally composing the perfect response to a comment that someone made 3 days ago in a meeting that everyone else has already forgotten. Emotionally secure people don't do this, not because they don't care about how they're perceived. They're human, of course they care, but because they have made a clear-eyed distinction between what is within their control and what isn't. And what other people think of them falls squarely in the second category. Here's a real example. You make a strategic decision at work, one you've thought through carefully, one you believe in. A colleague misreads it. Maybe they think it was careless, or politically motivated, or simply wrong. An emotionally insecure person responds immediately. They send the follow-up email. They walk through their reasoning in exhausting detail. They seek out the colleague at the coffee machine to make sure the record is corrected. They cannot rest until the misunderstanding is resolved, because the misunderstanding feels like a threat to their reputation, to their identity, to their carefully constructed sense of self. An emotionally secure person does something different. They trust that their track record speaks for itself. They understand that not every moment requires a rebuttal. They let the misunderstanding exist uncomfortably without rushing to fix it, because they are grounded enough in their own self-knowledge that someone else's incorrect interpretation of them does not constitute a crisis. The Stoic emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote, "I have often wondered how it is that every man loves himself more than all the rest of men, but yet sets less value on his own opinion of himself than on the opinion of others." He was pointing at something we all know but rarely admit. We know ourselves better than anyone else does, and yet we treat external judgment as though it carries more authority than our own inner knowing. Emotionally secure people have reversed this. They hold their own counsel. They know who they are, and that knowledge is stable enough that it doesn't require constant external validation to remain standing. Epictetus made this even more direct. "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change, for I seek the truth, by which no one was ever truly harmed." It is the person who continues in self-deception and ignorance who is harmed. The emotionally secure person is always open to genuine correction. What they are not vulnerable to is the mere discomfort of being misread. Those are two entirely different things, and knowing the difference is a form of wisdom. Trait number 2, they aren't afraid to change their minds. There is a well-documented psychological phenomenon called belief perseverance. the tendency for people to hold onto their existing opinions even in the face of clear, compelling evidence that those opinions are wrong. And the research on why this happens is both fascinating and slightly depressing. People don't cling to their beliefs because they think the beliefs are true. They cling to them because they have fused their identity with being right. To change your mind in this framework is not to update your understanding of the world. It is to lose. It is to be defeated. It is to admit, publicly and humiliatingly, that you were wrong. And if being right is who you are, then being wrong is an existential threat. Emotionally secure people are immune to this trap. Not because they don't have opinions, they often have very strong ones, but because their identity is not fused with those opinions. Their opinions are things they hold, not things they are. And when you hold something rather than being it, you can set it down, you can examine it, you can replace it with something better without feeling like you're dismantling yourself. This is one of the most liberating qualities I observe in emotionally secure people. They will sit in a meeting, argue passionately for a position, and then, when presented with new information or a perspective they hadn't considered, genuinely, visibly, and without embarrassment, change their mind. They say things like, "That's a really good point, I hadn't thought about it that way," and they mean it. They don't say it as a social nicety before pivoting back to their original position. They mean it, they update, they move forward with the new understanding, and they feel no loss in doing so, because they understand that changing your mind is not a defeat. It is growth. The Stoics were deeply committed to this idea. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake in any thought or action, I shall gladly change. I seek the truth, which never harmed anyone." He was the most powerful man in the Roman Empire, and he wrote this sincerely in his private journal with no audience to perform for. He genuinely wanted to be corrected. He understood that the ability to change your mind is not a weakness. It is the mechanism by which human beings become wiser over time. Think about the people in your life who have never changed a significant opinion. The ones who hold the same political views, the same judgments about people, the same theories about how the world works that they held 20 years ago. Unmoved, unchanged, apparently impervious to the enormous amount of information and experience they've encountered in the intervening decades. Are those people wiser than they were? Or are they just older, with more firmly calcified certainty? Emotional security gives you the freedom to be wrong, and therefore the freedom to become right. That is not a small gift. Trait number 3. They have a high tolerance for uncertainty. Emotionally secure people are comfortable saying, "I don't know yet." 3 words that most people find almost physically painful to utter in a professional context, or a personal one for that matter. We live in a world that rewards certainty, decisiveness, the appearance of having it all figured out. Leaders are expected to project confidence, even when they're navigating genuine ambiguity. Employees are expected to have answers. Parents are expected to know what they're doing. And so most of us have become very good at performing certainty, even when what we actually feel is a swirling, uncomfortable, disorienting fog of not knowing. Emotionally secure people don't perform certainty they don't feel. Instead, they have developed what psychologists call a high tolerance for ambiguity, the ability to exist comfortably in uncertain conditions without it triggering anxiety, paralysis, or the desperate need to resolve the uncertainty prematurely just to feel better. And the research on this is remarkable. Studies consistently show that people with a higher tolerance for ambiguity are more resilient under pressure, make better decisions in volatile environments, and are significantly better at solving complex problems, precisely because they don't rush to false conclusions just to escape the discomfort of not knowing. This might look like sitting with a difficult career transition without immediately accepting the first job offer that appears, simply because the offer provides relief from the anxiety of uncertainty. It might look like developing a new product or creative project without knowing how it will be received, holding the not knowing with curiosity rather than dread. It might look like staying in a hard conversation without trying to wrap it up tidily before all the difficult things have been said. The Stoics had a name for this capacity. They called it the discipline of assent, the practice of not immediately reacting to every impression, every fear, every unanswered question, but instead pausing, holding, examining, and responding only when you have genuine clarity. Epictetus taught his students to ask, in any moment of uncertainty, "Is this within my control?" And if the answer was no, if the uncertainty was about something that hadn't happened yet, or that depended on forces outside themselves. Then the only wise response was to release the need to resolve it and get comfortable with not knowing. Uncertainty, for the emotionally secure person, is not a problem to be solved. It is simply the texture of a life lived at the frontier of what's possible, and if you think about it, every interesting thing that has ever happened to any human being has begun in uncertainty. Every great relationship, every meaningful career, every creative breakthrough, every moment of genuine growth, all of it started in the uncomfortable, disorienting, genuinely exciting space of not yet knowing what comes next. Trait number 4. They aren't easily offended. Insecure people are constantly on alert. They move through the world with their defenses raised, scanning every interaction for potential slights, reading between the lines of every email for hidden criticism, interpreting neutral comments as veiled attacks. And the exhausting, ironic thing about this posture is that it doesn't protect them. It actually makes them more fragile. Because when you are constantly looking for evidence that you are being disrespected, you will find it everywhere, whether it's there or not. Emotionally secure people operate from an entirely different baseline. They extend generous benefit of the doubt as a default setting, not as a conscious effort, but as a natural expression of their own inner stability. They don't assume malice where carelessness is a sufficient explanation. They don't feel diminished by casual thoughtlessness. They don't require every interaction to affirm their worth. And so when an interaction fails to do so, it doesn't register as a wound. Now, some people hear this and think it sounds naive. They think that giving people the benefit of the doubt means being a pushover, means letting people walk over you, means being willfully blind to genuine disrespect. But that's a misunderstanding of what emotional security actually looks like. Emotionally secure people aren't oblivious. They notice when they've been wronged. The difference is that they trust themselves to handle it with grace when it matters. And they've developed the discernment to know the difference between what matters and what doesn't. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." He wasn't talking about dramatic acts of vengeance. He was talking about the small daily choice not to be pulled down to the level of pettiness, reactivity, and ego protection that characterizes so much of human interaction. The emotionally secure person sees the slight, considers it, determines it isn't worth their peace, and moves on, not because they're suppressing anything, not because they're performing equanimity, but because they are genuinely, fundamentally okay, and okay doesn't shatter at the first sign of friction. There's a concept in Stoicism called the reserve clause, the practice of pursuing your goals and engaging in relationships, while always holding the implicit awareness that things may not go as planned, that people may disappoint, that the world may not cooperate. This isn't pessimism, it's preparation. It's the inner posture of someone who isn't surprised when reality turns out to be complicated, and who therefore isn't derailed by it. Trait number 5. They don't need to have the last word. Think about the last meeting or conversation where someone got the final word, and it wasn't you. Did it bother you? Be honest. For most people, if they sit with that question long enough, the answer is yes, at least a little. There's something in us that wants to close, to conclude, to have our perspective be the one that lands last and lingers longest. And that desire, when we examine it honestly, is almost never about the content of what we want to say. It's about ego. It's about the need to dominate, to be seen as having won, to carry the authority of the person whose voice echoed in the room after everyone else fell silent. Emotionally secure people have no use for this, not because they don't have strong opinions. They often do. Not because they don't care about outcomes, they frequently care deeply, but because their sense of self doesn't depend on being the person who got the last word. Conversations for them are not contests. Meetings are not arenas. Disagreements are not battles with victors and losers. They are simply exchanges, sometimes productive, sometimes frustrating, sometimes unresolved. And the emotionally secure person can walk away from an unresolved exchange without needing to reopen it, just to get closure that serves their ego, rather than the conversation. Someone can disagree with them, someone can push back hard, land the final point, and be genuinely right. And the emotionally secure person can say, "Fair enough," and mean it, and move on without the interaction occupying any more mental real estate than it deserves. Seneca wrote, "Vindica te tibi," reclaim yourself for yourself. He was urging his readers to stop spending their inner resources on the opinions and reactions of others, to stop treating every social interaction as a referendum on their worth, and to redirect that energy inward, toward their own growth, their own work, their own becoming. The person who always needs the last word is handing their peace over to whoever they're in conversation with. They are making their sense of resolution contingent on something outside themselves, on the other person conceding, backing down, acknowledging defeat. The emotionally secure person keeps their peace inside. No one else's response can give it to them, and no one else's final word can take it away. Trait number 6, they seek out people who challenge them. Here is one of the clearest and most underappreciated signs of emotional security. The ability to genuinely enjoy being around people who are better than you at things that matter to you. Not tolerate it, not endure it, enjoy it. Most people, if they're honest, find this uncomfortable. When we're around someone whose accomplishments exceed ours in an area we care about, someone more successful, more creative, more disciplined, more admired, something contracts. We compare. We measure. We find ourselves doing quiet, unflattering arithmetic in our heads. What they have that we don't, what they've done that we haven't, how far behind we are, whether we're falling short of what we could be. And sometimes that comparison is motivating. But often it's just painful. And we respond to the pain by avoiding the people who trigger it. We surround ourselves with people who make us feel capable and accomplished by comparison, rather than people who push us to become more than we currently are. Emotionally secure people do the opposite. They actively seek out people who challenge them, surpass them, and see the world differently. They understand at a cellular level that being around excellence is how you grow, that proximity to people who are further along the path than you are is one of the most powerful development tools available to any human being. They are energized by the company of people who know more than they do. If you want to test your own level of emotional security, try this. Think about the last time you were genuinely not the most accomplished person in the room, not just slightly outperformed, but clearly in the presence of someone operating at a level meaningfully above yours. Were you uncomfortable? Were you energized? The answer tells you something important. The Stoics called this practice of seeking out challenge and difficulty as a path to growth voluntary hardship. They believe that deliberately placing yourself in uncomfortable situations, around people who expose your limitations in circumstances that reveal your edges, was not masochism. It was wisdom. It was the recognition that comfort, while pleasant, is the enemy of development, and surrounding yourself only with people who confirm your existing view of yourself, who reflect back your current capabilities rather than pointing toward what you could become, is one of the quietest and most socially acceptable forms of stagnation available to a human being. The next time you find yourself in the company of someone whose accomplishments make you feel small, try something different. Instead of retreating into comparison and contraction, get curious. Ask them how they think. Ask them what's important to them. Ask them how they got where they are. You might be surprised by what you find, and by what it reveals about what's possible for you. Trait number 7. They are immune to envy. This is the rarest trait on this list, and it might be the most telling. Think about the last time a peer, someone at roughly your level, in roughly your world, doing roughly what you do, got an opportunity that you wanted. A promotion, a recognition, a deal, an invitation, a relationship, something you had been working toward or hoping for or quietly assuming would eventually come to you. What happened inside you in that moment? If you're human, there was probably a pull toward comparison, a reflexive measurement of yourself against them, a quiet, uncomfortable, slightly shameful question, why them and not me? That's envy, and it is one of the most universal human experiences. Virtually everyone feels it, and virtually no one wants to admit it, because envy is deeply unflattering. It reveals the smallness in us, the zero-sum thinking, the suggestion that someone else's gain diminishes us somehow. Emotionally secure people feel the pull of envy. They are human after all, but they are not governed by it. They have cultivated something rarer and more powerful, the genuine ability to see someone else succeed in an area that matters to them, without letting it shake their sense of their own worth or trajectory. They understand, not as a platitude, but as a lived truth, that someone else winning does not mean they are losing. That success is not a finite resource. That there is room, real, actual, abundant room, for everyone to flourish. The Stoics were merciless about envy. They identified it as one of the most self-destructive emotions available to a human being, not because it is morally wrong, but because of what it does to the person who experiences it. Envy directs your attention outward and backward. It keeps your gaze fixed on someone else's path rather than your own. It generates suffering that is entirely self-inflicted. You feel bad not because something bad happened to you, but because something good happened to someone else. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Envy is the surrender of that power. It is the decision, made at some level, to let someone else's good fortune determine your emotional state. The emotionally secure person refuses this surrender. They celebrate the wins of the people around them, genuinely, without performance, because they understand that excellence anywhere in their world enriches their world. That the colleague who got the promotion is proof that the promotion is achievable. That the friend who found the extraordinary relationship is evidence that extraordinary relationships exist. That the peer who created the breakthrough work is a demonstration of what human beings are capable of, and therefore what they are capable of too. Immunity to envy isn't coldness, it isn't indifference. It is, in fact, one of the most generous and expansive ways a human being can move through the world. So let's bring it all together. 7 traits. 7 quiet, powerful, deeply human qualities that show up again and again in the most emotionally secure people I have encountered across thousands of interviews and years of research into what makes human beings genuinely thrive. They are okay with being misunderstood, because their sense of self doesn't depend on other people's interpretations of them. They aren't afraid to change their minds, because their identity is not fused with being right, and changing your mind is how you grow. They have a high tolerance for uncertainty, because they have learned to hold the not knowing with curiosity rather than anxiety, and to trust themselves to navigate whatever emerges. They aren't easily offended, because they extend generous benefit of the doubt as a default, and they trust that if they are genuinely wronged, they can handle it with grace. They don't need to have the last word, because conversations are not contests to them, and their peace doesn't depend on anyone else's concession. They seek out people who challenge them, because they understand that proximity to excellence is how you become more excellent, and that being the least accomplished person in the room is a gift, not a threat. And they are immune to envy, because they have genuinely internalized the truth that someone else's success is not their loss, and that there is room, real, abundant, inexhaustible room, for everyone to flourish. The Stoics spent centuries mapping the inner territory of the human being, identifying the habits of mind and character that lead to a life of genuine stability, genuine freedom, and genuine happiness. And what they found over and over again is what I keep finding in my research today: that the quality of your life is determined not by what happens to you, but by the stability of the self that meets what happens to you. Build that self. Cultivate these traits, not as a performance, not as a strategy for appearing more secure than you feel, but as a genuine, daily, patient practice of becoming more grounded in who you are and what you value. Because the most emotionally secure people I know aren't people who were born this way. They are people who chose this way, one small, quiet, often invisible choice at a time, and that choice is available to you right now, regardless of where you're starting from. I hope something in this was useful to you. If it was, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Take care of yourselves out there.